pleasure to move to a presentation by the Melissa Institute's scientific director and one of the founders of the institute. Don Meichenbaum is one of the founders of the of cognitive behavioral therapy. Was voted among the 10 most influential psychotherapists of the 20th century by North American clinicians. He has presented in all 50 states and internationally. He has published extensively, and his most recent book is Roadmap to Resilience, that has been downloaded by more than 40,000 people in over 130 countries. Don is going to talk to us about cognitive behavioral therapy strategies to address trauma and promote resilience.
Thank you all for your attendance and interest. And moreover, let me commend you on your good judgment in being here. We live in very troubled times. In fact, the most recent data indicates that some 300,000 students in the United States have been exposed to violence given the epidemic of mass shootings. Before I get into the topic at hand, let me, like my colleagues preceding me, convey that I am privileged and honored to have been the research director of the Melissa Institute for these 27 years, and to work alongside of Lynn and Michael Appman, who have been able to transform their loss into a gift of others. As Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning and the survivor of the Holocaust and concentration camps, noted, we as human beings can deal with almost any kind of how, as long as we can transform that into a why. The Appmans have been noble and creative in translating their loss into the Melissa Institute, which over the last 27 years has over 2 million hits, has done remarkable training. And I encourage you and challenge you to visit the Melissa Institute website. If you think you've gotten good information here, this will be amplified by what you will find online. I will give you multiple examples of this during the course of this presentation. There's one other moment of appreciation that I need to highlight, and that is to Christina, our talented person who is overseeing this entire presentation, as well as to Etione, who has taken on the leadership in taking the Melissa Institute into a new area. I should note that I am a member of the same tribe as Jim Lawson, and that is I'm a Luddite when it comes to various kinds of PowerPoints. So in order to save me, I have put together a handout that covers my presentation that will be made available to each of you. Thus, I can get to the topic at hand and then have to struggle with PowerPoints. Let me give you an overview of what I hope to accomplish in this presentation. One is I want to talk a little bit about the nature of resilience. My colleague, Sherry Hamby, has noted that that trauma is everywhere. But she also highlights that so is resilience. And in fact, the good stuff is more important than the bad stuff. We've heard Deb Pepler talk about the incidence and impact of ACEs. I want you to know that there is also a literature on what is called PACEs. That is protective factors, which Dr. Hamby nicely illustrated for us. I will give you other such examples. And then I want to talk about tier 3, not only that which is widespread throughout the school, and the subsequent tier, which is to identify high-risk kids, apropos of what Jim Lawson was talking about in terms of those in need of anger control and the like. but there is a line of research that we should all be familiar with called trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy and related interventions that deal with those children who have cumulative exposure to a cascading array of victimization experiences. I want to tell you what's on my mind before I get to those two topics. You know, in the aftermath of an airplane accident or a train incident, the very first thing that's being searched for is what is called the black box. So in the aftermath of an airplane accident, people want to ascertain whether this was due to pilot error, whether it was due to mechanical factors, whether it was due to environmental burns into the engines, what have you. The same thing in the aftermath of other kinds of major accidents, like trains and the like. I want you to consider and think about over the course of my presentation, what would you put in the black box after a school shooting? Imagine that I gave you the opportunity to interview the mother of the 6-year-old who brought a gun to school and shot a teacher. Imagine that I gave you an occasion that you could go through all of the school protocols concerning that child. What would you look for? Would you ask yourself, had the school reached out to this parent beforehand? Would you put into your equation, into your toolbox, into your black box, whether in fact the teachers who had him in kindergarten wrote him up and identified him as a high risk that was passed on to additional teachers down the road? Would you include in your black box whether there was anyone who saw him as an identified high-risk child who reached out to him, someone who did a home visitation? Now, one of the things we know is that my fantasy of creating such a black box would never, ever be implemented because the school would be held liable and lawyers would sue them, that there are barriers. But imagine that after each of these incidents, we could go back and identify, and in an anonymous fashion, without naming one school in particular or holding one administrator responsible, could we, in a cumulative wisdom fashion, identify those risk and protective factors that were present or not? You know, in the aftermath of these school shootings, newspapers and others spend a lot of time assessing the features of the perpetrator and perhaps their family. We never learn what the school did or did not do on a preventative basis. What do we know about resilience engendering activities by schools that we can have a checklist to see the presence or absence of these along the way? One of the things that has been highlighted, especially in Dr. Pepler's presentation, is the critical role of relationships. On the Melissa Institute website, we have had annual conferences for 27 years. We have had the leaders in the field, Ann Maston, Esther Deblinger, Betty Pfeffenbaum, Marlene Wang, Joan Asano, all highlight what are the key ingredients of resilience. And as Ann Maston noted and has repeated here by our presenters, resilience is a kind of ordinary magic, as she uses the phrase, and that everybody has the ability to bolster and strengthen their resilience. And as I noted in the handout, individuals can be resilient at one time in life and not at other times, or in one domain and not in other domains. And moreover, resilience and trauma experiences that linger can coexist. This is not an either or proposition. And as people study the impact of trauma, there is really good news. The good news that even if individuals have 4 or more ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, 1/2 to 2/3 of individual students and their families will evidence the ability to bounce back and to deal with ongoing adversities. So there has been a great deal of research to look at the characteristics of these resilient children and their families. And note that there's also evidence that you can have a resilient community. And this highlights the way in which the environment, the significant others, come into play in bolstering resilience. One of the things we know is that relationships are key. So how do we identify those children who are in need, who are not falling into that 1/2 to 2/3 of groups? One of my favorite questions to ask students is the following. I say to them, if you were absent from school, who beside your friends would notice that you're missing and would miss you? If you were absent from school, who beside your friends would notice that you're missing and would miss you? We know that school connectedness is a critical component. If you were having a problem in school, who would you turn to? So one of the things that becomes interesting is not only can you ask that student that question, but you could go in and ask teachers, given all of the names that you've put on their checklist, which students do you have any sense of contact with? Which students, both boys and girls, who you cross paths with, might come to you and seek assistance? Which students avoid any contact with you? Could we get teacher nominations of that level of school connectedness? We could ask peers, fellow students who are more knowledgeable than others, to indicate who is in need of help. I'm reminded of Ron Slaby's creative technique of having what he calls pronto boxes around. That is, students can put in the name in that pronto box, like a mailbox, of those students that they think need help immediately. Some people have developed what they call a kind of creative class play measure. The teacher goes in and says to the class, hey guys, I'd like you to do something a little bit different, a bit unusual in this class. You know what I want you to do is I would like you very much to act like a director of a movie or play. Now, this is the cool thing that a director does. You ready for this? See, what he does is he figures out who should play what part, okay? So I've given you a name of all the kids in the classroom, the boys on one list and the girls on the other. And I'm going to read out various parts, and you just put a check mark next to the person who you think, okay, might be someone who could play that part. Okay. Then the first role is you're going to have a party. Okay. It's a really kind of neat party, and you want to invite someone who you think would be really fun to have at the party. You know, someone you don't want to, who you would really want to invite and have come. Okay. Here's another role. I need someone who could help younger kids. Just those kids who need some kind of help. Here's another part. Can you just put a check mark? Just anyone who you think could play the role of, I don't know, let's call him a bully, someone who picks on younger kids. You think someone who's really scared and kind of gets sad all the time, and you could include yourself if any of these roles fit you. You think you'd be good for that part. You get the logic of this. And these are only two such examples of how we could identify children who may be at risk or in need. One of the things that emerges is that if you look at school shooters, one of the things that often emerges is that the school shooter has notified significant others about their intention. They may have even shared their plan with others. Therefore, creating an environment, a school climate that conveys the openness and respect, that this is not snitching, okay? This is not getting the other person in trouble, that this is sort of being one's brother's keeper. So one of the things that emerges is the question of how do we identify kids all the way from kindergarten to the fact they're age 7. And then, as Deb pointed out, what do we do in the interim 7 years before they get to point age 14? In fact, there is some data by Kasdan and others that suggest that after age 9, these kids would be less responsive to the kind of anger control problems and interventions that Jim Lawson has just discussed. It's kind of beneficial to be the last one in this very impressive set of presentations, because I can now respond and offer observations about others. One of the things that was commented by Deb is that one of our colleagues who's on the scientific board is Lena Ogmieri. And Lena Ogmieri has developed a program called SNAP. And what SNAP stands for is Stop Now and Plan. And if you go on the Melissa Institute website and go to resources, you will see on the right the presentations by previous presenters at these kinds of conferences. And if you go and scroll down to Lena Ogmieri, she has a video of how she has trained aggressive children who have emotion dysregulation, children for whom their lower brain stem, the amygdala and hippocampus, actually hijacks these students' frontal lobes. Now, not only has she demonstrated that these SNAP programs are impressive, she also now has data that when these children who had extensive training in SNAP were given fMRIs, that she showed that that kind of behavioral self-regulation training program actually changed the structure and function of their brains. Now that is impressive, okay? And if replicated, we can now see that the kind of programs that Jim Lawson and Lena Ogmieri are in fact developing and training parents and teachers to also do SNAP, okay? that may have a significant impact. I will also share with you that having kids engage in a variety of resilience engendering behaviors, like the mindfulness, like the cognitive reframing, like the use of humor and exercise, like meaning-making activities, of having positive emotions, also changes the structure and function of the brain and has behavioral positive sequelae. What is it that 1/2 or 2/3 of students are doing and not doing that contributes to their resilience, their ability to bounce back, to deal with ongoing adversities? How can we, as a school system, nurture this kind of optimism, this kind of grit, this kind of perseverance in engaging in socially desirable behaviors? Take, for instance, the work of Carol Dweck on the role of a positive mindset. She has a way of having teachers convey to students the kind of strengths that they need. What are the kinds of ways that they could view their level of performance in a more positive light? What she does is she conveys to these students who are struggling that she is going to teach them the tricks, the strategies of those students who are succeeding. That the struggles that they have are not an inadequacy of their abilities of functioning, but they just haven't learned, they haven't developed the mindset of being resilient. And one of the things we know about resilience is that optimism, some kind of sense of hopefulness, is a key ingredient. And one of the things we know that nurtures hope is helping collaboratively with students to set SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. One of the things we know about children who have been exposed to the cascading of multiple victimizations and trauma, the kind of adverse childhood experiences that's been discussed today, is that at the outset, in the immediate aftermath of physical and sexual abuse, of emotional neglect, of growing up in dysfunctional families, of being exposed to community violence, that there are neurological sequelae of children who have thus been exposed. As Bessel van der Kolk noted, the body keeps score. And if in fact we look at the neurological development and developmental delays of these students, as I summarize in your handout, the left side of their brain is 7 times less active than the right side of the brain, and that the corpus callosum and the anterior and posterior commissure are compromised. That the lower brainstem, as I noted, as the hippocampus and amygdala, have the ability to hijack the frontal lobe. That the neurotransmitter between the frontal lobe, the top-down section, is compromised. So these students, upon entering school, have much less school readiness, and they show particular deficits. So when I am presenting to teachers This is the way I present their needs and the specific implications. I say to the teachers the following. Imagine for a moment, I say, that you have a student in your school who is confined to a wheelchair for whatever physical disability they have. Now, you want these students not to be delayed in getting to school. So you, as a teacher, say, look, I've had enough excuses out of you. Get that wheelchair up those 4 stairs and just don't be late. I've had enough with your you would say, no. I, the educator, we, the school system, have a deficit. And the deficit is that we, the school, have not provided this student who's in the wheelchair with the prosthetic tools that they need to negotiate the school task and demands. We have not provided them with a physical ramp. In the bathroom, we have not provided the kind of prosthetic tool that they need to just negotiate that kind of self-care. At the elevator, there's no stick to reach the button. The shoes that we gave them are complicated shoelaces, not Velcro. I, the educator, okay? We, this school system, have a deficit. And then I say to the teachers, imagine that you have kids who are coming to school, who look normal. They're not confined to a wheelchair, okay? But yet they have been receiving and experiencing 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. That they have a delayed and compromised neurological and functional system. What are the prosthetic devices that these children need? What we call metacognitive prosthetic devices, or MPDs. How do you have to alter, if you quote unquote a trauma-informed school, the nature of your instructions? What are the kind of prosthetic devices that supplement the kind of frontal lobe executive functioning, the emotion regulation tools? How should we teach these kids to talk back to the amygdala? How do we engineer the environment? And if you go to the Melissa Institute, you could see papers by myself and others on what Bigland calls kernels. How can you provide the kind of prosthetic tools of advanced organizers, of removing distractions, of including memory aids and attentional processing? How do you create the kind of environment that Sherry Hamby was talking about that is supportive and nurturing the kind of deficits they have? Moreover, imagine that these children are coming also not only from having been exposed to some kind of traumatic events, but they also come from poverty. And we now know that the impact of poverty has a remarkable, important impact on the development of the brain. That the brains of children coming from poverty, especially if they're minority status, is less developed than their middle-class counterparts. Moreover, in terms of school readiness, these children who are coming from poverty are entering school approximately 2,000 vocabulary words behind their middle class and upper class counterparts. And it turns out that reading comprehension by the 3rd grade is an absolutely critical component and feature It's sort of the gateway skill to trajectory. So if kids are deficient in vocabulary and in reading comprehension by grade 3, they rarely get taught reading skills afterwards. Not only that, they're frustrated in the academic performance, and they're more likely to engage in behavior problems. Those behavior problems may result in them being put in specific kinds of special classrooms. With whom? With other kids who have similar problems. The Melissa Institute has recognized the critical role of reading comprehension and violence. It turns out that the lower the reading comprehension score, the more intense and frequent the nature of the violence. And if you go into juvenile programs, as the Melissa Institute has, approximately 1/3 to 1/2 have literacy problems or reading comprehension. In order to address this, the Melissa Institute has online for free 500 free movies on how to teach young children to read. We think that reading is one of the most important kind of preventative techniques that we can use in order to influence the nature of the developmental path of these children. That these kinds of academic pursuits, these kinds of school connectedness, are the kinds of preventions that we can identify high-risk kids and intervene in those 7 years. But there are some kids and some families that even need more. As Jim was highlighting, there's a tier 1. Does the school have a mission statement? Do they have an outreach program of engaging in teacher involvement? If you go to our book on nurturing independent learners, we have a whole checklist there. The Melissa Institute has put together a principal checklist. My daughters, my daughter-in-law, my son are all involved in education. As they remind me, nothing happens in a school unless the principal buys in. That the principal sets the tone of bolstering resilience in his staff, as well as in his students. So if you go to the Slaby video on positive behaviors, who's out there? The superintendent, the principal, the one who's greeting, the one who's setting the tone, the one that's engendering a trustful, safe environment, the one who's involving parents. Instead of blaming the parents for not showing up, or not being engaged, I would encourage you to go to our checklist that's online on all the things that schools, principals, and teachers should do to reach out. One program, for instance, decided to have parent night at the laundromat, and every parent who showed up to talk to the teacher got a free wash. What does it take to make that extra step? In addition, you can get a principal checklist and have principals share what they've done to create a safe environment, to provide reassurance. What should the principal do in the aftermath of the shooting in Uvalde? What does the principal and that school community do in the aftermath? How do you run safe drills for young students without scaring them? How can you inadvertently have police run a drill without a warning? We address the issue of anxiety and depression that's so rampant in our schools and ever increasing. So one tier is, how do we create that environment? How do we use the strategy of nudges and other kinds of self-assessments? How do we make our schools more culturally sensitive? What are our schools doing to protect transgender youth who have the highest incidence of suicide? How can schools inadvertently actually make our schools more stressful? How many schools have a flag program of involving parents and contributing to the school atmosphere? What can schools do in identifying and providing the mental health services and contacts? Dr. Cicchetti has provided many answers to these kinds of questions that is a model for the country. A second kind of tier group that has been receiving some attention is the anger management programs that Dr. Lawson has highlighted. But there are other kinds of interventions that are evidence-based to identify and have students self-refer that they would want to be participants, like the cognitive behavioral intervention for trauma in the school by Lisa J. Cox and Marlene Wong, who is presented at our conference. The Sparks program. There are programs now at the tier level of working with children whose parents are going through divorce. There are intervention programs at that level too that deals with children who have lost loved ones due to COVID. Once again, you can go to the Melissa Institute to see the variety of group-based interventions that have been conducted in schools with targeted youth. But there is yet a third tier, a tier that has also received a great deal of evidence. And these I include under the trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. And in fact, as I note in your handout, each of you could go to the website of MUSC, which stands for the Medical University of South Carolina, okay? And that you can go there and .edu TFCBT, and you can get ongoing training, either as a teacher understanding how to intervene, or as a clinician providing what one might consider as wraparound services. There are children that I have worked with who require more extensive interventions. I will not take a great deal of time here to highlight and discuss in detail the ways to implement these interventions. They have summarized it under a mnemonic called practice that stands for a whole variety of specific interventions. Let me provide a caveat or warning. None of these skills-oriented interventions, either with parents or with the students, of teaching either cognitive emotion regulation or in fact engaging the parent and the student who's been victimized in a kind of narrative. None of this will work unless you have a good quality of therapeutic alliance. That the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance that you develop with children who you're working with or with their parents or the combination therein is more important than the specific technique that you use. Unfortunately, most therapists do not systematically, on a session-by-session basis, evaluate the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance on a regular basis, either with the children they're seeing in therapy or the adult patients they are also seeing. I want to make you aware of the work of Scott Miller and his colleagues, who have developed what they call a feedback-informed treatment model. So they have now developed rating scales, both for children and adults, whereby in a few minutes, they ask students to rate the degree to which there is a fit between what is being offered by the therapist and what they need. We know that the quality of the therapeutic alliance is 3 to 4 times more important than any specific intervention you use. I don't care what your theoretical perspective is. So I invite you to go to Scott D. Miller and look up feedback-informed treatment. They ask whether, in fact, the client feels that they were heard and respected. They ask the client if they feel that the therapist and them talked about what they thought should be talked about. They ask the child and the adult whether they feel there's a good fit, that this is contributing to some goal-directed behavior change that they could both talk about. And moreover, following this kind of session-by-session feedback, the therapist and the client, whether it's a child, adolescent, or adult, can talk about where the therapist is engaged in the art of questioning in order to see how they could be of help. We now know that therapies, and keep in mind that there are over 400 therapies out there, okay? Can you imagine that? Imagine you going to a doctor and saying, well, Don, I'm really glad you came to see me. I have 400 different things we could try, right? And you go, I'm out of here, right? So we now know when therapy works, what makes it work, okay? And the first thing you need to know is that whatever intervention you do has to be person-centered. It has to be sensitive to the age of the child and the developmental differences, whether it's an early or late adolescent in development. You need to know that therapy has to be person-centered and not protocol-driven. I don't care what's called evidence-based. There are different kinds of parent training programs for Latinos, for African Americans, for Native Indians. All the data indicates that insofar as you are person-centered, you will be much more effective than just going to any particular manual. The second thing we know about those interventions that work is that they have to be goal-oriented. You have to ask the child whether they see there's a problem, that there's a difference between the way things are and the way they would like them to be. You need to ask them, what do they think is causing their problems? Why did your mom bring you here now? Okay, what do you know about what I do? Can I give you a tour? Can we talk about? So unless you develop that therapeutic alliance with that kid, and then the degree to which you can develop collaborative goals that are going to be practical and that we could move towards. And remember that any intervention you use, you cannot merely train and hope that it will transfer. As Dr. Larson was highlighting, you have to build in generalization. And moreover, if you go to the Melissa Institute, I've put together a checklist from all the literature on generalization on what you need to do before, during, and after any kind of intervention. You could teach all of these kinds of emotion regulation skills. But as Jim was highlighting, that knowledge does not translate to your actually doing it. You need to put the person in a consultative mode where they can know it, do it, and in fact, teach it to others and to themselves. We need to teach them how to use the metacognitive prosthetic tools that we talked about. What makes for effective therapy? It has to be person-centered. It has to be culturally relevant. It has to be goal-directed. So there's some kind of here and now behavioral change that we can point to. Thirdly, it has to be resilient-oriented. It is our job to nurture the strengths that our clients bring to us. They have each survived in some way. Is there anything that they've done in the past that we can still now use, that we can build upon? Don't be deficit-oriented, as Dr. Hamby highlighted, but be resilient-oriented. And the final component that makes these therapies work is that they're community-based. That they are, in fact, in some ways, involving significant others in nurturing the resilience that goes ahead and helping our children fall into the 1/2 to 2/3 who make it in spite of the exposure to trauma and victimization. Part of that community that Dr. Slaby was highlighting, and that I want to underscore, is we need to reach out to those political decision makers who can reduce the risk of our children. Go back to my black box. What do you think if I give you all of those schools, the Newtown shooting schools, the Uvalde schools, the one in Nashville that was recently attacked, and we look at what is it that they did or did not do that nurtures resilience? Can we learn lessons of what those schools are doing that nurtures resilience and learn from that? I have written a book called Roadmap to Resilience. And in honor of my deceased wife recently, I have made that book available on the internet for free. And I encourage you to go to roadmaptoresilience.wordpress.com. Go into the appendix, and it has a variety of physical, interpersonal, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and spiritual ways to bolster resilience. That has now been downloaded actually by 43,000 visitors in 138 countries. I invite you to access that. And my final pitch is, if you find this presentation worthwhile, if you find the mission of the Melissa Institute of value in pointing a hopeful direction, please do not hesitate to make a donation. Please do not hesitate to share this conference with others. Everything that the Melissa Institute does is for free. I want to thank each and every one of you for your attendance and interest, and we look forward to the panel discussion.